Again, thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Today's webinar features 3 recently licensed architects who can provide insights into their path to licensure, discuss how they overcome difficulties along the path, and provide tips for candidates on that same path. My name is Martin Smith. I'm the Assistant Vice President, Experience and Education at NCARB. I have been with NCARB for over 13 years now, and I am an architect licensed in the state of New York. I work a lot with our experience programs, architect licensing advisor community, outreach to universities and AIA components, as well as help work with our volunteers who develop our programs, especially around the experience and education aspects of licensure. So anything that you're doing on the path to becoming an architect is talked about and vetted and determined from our profession itself. I'm very excited to have a wonderful 3 recent licensed architects here, Ellen Lee, Farah Kadir, and Nikki Karp. And let's take a few moments to let each of them take a moment to introduce themselves. So let's start off with Alan, and we'll go to Farah and Nikki following that. So Alan.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for having me today. My name is Alan Lee. I'm a project architect with Summit Design and Engineering here in the Colorado branch. Our HQ is based in North Carolina. Here in our local office, I'm straddling both local commercial and residential projects, a little bit of land planning and marketing as well. I graduated and started my career back in 2015 in Chicago for a little bit. Then I moved here to Colorado. I got licensed just about 3 years ago. Now I'm licensed in Colorado, California, and Florida. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Farah Kadir, and I got licensed in 2018. It was a 3-year journey from the moment I submitted my license application to the moment I received my official license number from the state board. I'm a public sector architect based in New York City, working for local government at various city agencies for over a decade now, and specializing in green building standards and sustainable design review. I'm also a green building journalist and write for publications including AIA, USGBC, amongst other publications. And I am a graduate of the City College of New York in 2012, and looking forward to sharing any tips that will alleviate what may seem like a daunting task, but is actually an achievable goal.
Hi, I'm Nikki Karp. I'm a project architect and associate at Arcadis IBI Group. I'm based in New York City, but I moved here recently after living in Los Angeles for 11 years. I focus primarily on residential high-rise, hospitality, and transportation projects, but working for a super large firm like IBI Group has given me the opportunity to work on many different types of projects. I was first licensed in New York in 2019 and in California in 2020. I'm also one of our firm's licensing advisors starting in 2019 as well. Thank you for having me, and it's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, we're so glad you're all able to join us today. And Nicole, as you mentioned just a moment ago, you're a licensing advisor. Can you tell us a little bit about what licensing advisors are and the work you do in that role?
So in general, a licensing advisor is a volunteer that's connected to NCARB that basically helps licensure candidates navigate the process of becoming licensed. And they also help people who are currently licensed address any questions or issues they may have with reciprocity, for instance, or maintaining those licenses. So at Arcadis IBI Group, in particular, I like to think of my role as having 2 major functions. So I've been running a licensing and certification advisory group online since 2019. We're a mostly hybrid work firm, and so study games and events are hosted through that Teams channel every month. Arcadis IBI Group is also an international firm with 3,500 employees. So the other big part of my role involves helping our employees navigate the process of getting their license or a reciprocal license when they've been educated or previously licensed in another country. And so as our firm is now more commonly building teams across borders and growing, understanding these processes and educating leadership about them is something I've really been focused on in the past year.
Thanks, Nikki. And it's great to have you as part of the community. If any of you here listening want to know more about the Architect Licensing Advisor community, just look it up on our NCARB website. There's a lot of great details as well as information about what that role is if you really want to help others pursue their career goals of licensure or reciprocity between states and jurisdictions. So we're going to kick off our webinar today with our experts sharing their experiences as they earn their license. Then we'll open discussion to any answer any questions you all may have. So please feel free to leave your questions in the Q&A tool at any time. Also be aware that in the Q&A tool, we do have several NCARB team members that are in there providing responses. So if you have other questions and things, they're going to do the best they can to get to those. But again, a lot of the questions that we're going to be bringing to our panelists are going to be around the process and impediments that you may run into with the licensure process. But we will go from there. So feel free to use the Q&A box for all those types of questions. But to get us started, get this conversation started, I'd love to have each of you share, our panelists share, how you earned your license and your experiences while working to obtain it. And so let's start off with Farah.
Yeah, so it's a good question. I was about 3 years into the profession when a mentor encouraged me to just start now, or that it would, get harder later. I had always been intimidated by the process, and that was because I just didn't know much about it. I made assumptions about how difficult or challenging or how long, it might be. And one day I just put my application in and started passively reading about the exam topics and content. And it was really in that first month of gathering study materials and doing some initial prep work that the process itself became demystified and really doable. I changed my mindset at that point. I realized that the best way to view the studying journey was to see it as a supplemental tool for me as a practicing professional. I wasn't studying for an exam, I was studying to become a better architect. And when you realize that, it doesn't become as much of a stressful push to just pass a huge test, but more of a day-to-day victory where each day I was learning something valuable to help me in my day-to-day work as an architect. And so what I want to hammer home is that making the connection of the relevancy of the exams to your practice, instead of seeing it as this formal academic exercise, just makes it so much easier to get through mentally. And something that I also realize is that going into the exam with a few years of work experience, so about 3 years after graduation, also helped me understand the exam concepts and relate it to my work a lot better than if I had gone into the exam with no prior work experience. So those are just some initial takeaways from the exam process.
Thanks, Farah. Nikki, can you share a little about your path?
So I started testing when ARE 5.0 was first launched. I got married a few months before that happened. And so my husband, who's also now an architect, and I decided that we were going to start taking exams together and support each other. So at that time, the score reports were unavailable for, I think, several months after testing. So in many ways, I went into that process blind. So kind of without all the foreknowledge that I think all of you are testing now have about the exam. So there was very little available in terms of third-party study materials. So I actually relied quite a lot on NCARB's recommended resource books and some resources that were designed for 4.0. And so while not having that ready-made study guide felt very challenging at the time, the extra work that I did to come up with my own study materials and my own study outlines, I feel really helped me grow in my knowledge, in practice. As sort of Farah mentioned, that studying for the test, really does help you in your work. And I think that strategy, helped me be more successful in the long run. So I'm now grateful that I really had to struggle to put that together and really do that extra work to hunt down the information and create outlines for so many topics. I completed my exams before finishing AXP and the additional work hours requirements for New York. So after I sort of reached that big milestone, like, yay, I'm done with all of my tests. I had to wait a couple of months and really make a big push to complete some AXP categories before I could apply for my first license. If I could go back in time, I think I would have paid a little more attention to the progress I was making in those different categories while I was studying for exams. I passed the CSE in 2020. So I'm also licensed in California. So just as an added note, a lot of the folks in the LA office of my firm are also studying for CSE. So part of the licensing advisory unofficially does discuss and support candidates who are taking that additional exam.
Thanks, Nikki. Alan, love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I guess I'm gonna go back in time a little bit here. So I guess for me, my goal had been pretty straightforward back in school. Oh, by the way, I graduated from the Art Institute of Chicago. I forgot to mention in my introduction. So most of our professors would always try to encourage or even try to push us to at least understand the concept that you guys are not going to be an architect until you're licensed. So at that time, I asked myself, do I want to be an architect in the future? I mean, of course, the answer was yes. But I didn't start prepping for the exams in school or right after graduation. I kind of waited about 2 years out of school. So, but my journey took me about 2 years as well. I got just before the holiday season of 2019, which was perfect timing for me to relax. So I started with the 4.0 and switched to 5.0. So I did 5 exam kind of plan back then. Of course, I failed a couple of those along the way. It was called IDP before, which was also perfect timing. So all my past firms were very supportive, and they provided us with either study materials or reimbursements or both. So during those 2 years of study, I didn't actually take any long break between each pass or each fail. So I just kept it going. I think I would say I overstudy a little bit for each exam. I used to do about like 20+ hours per week in general. I would try to take advantage of all the study materials I could have access to, including all the books. I bought all the books from my past firms, the AIE forum, YouTube videos, of course, a lot of mentorship and help from my coworkers and supervisors. So yeah, so like I said, I got my license just 3 years ago, and I got the California. I passed the CSE exam just over a year ago. So yeah, so that's about my journey.
Great. So sort of going round robin again, or if you want to jump in, however you want to do that. What would you say were your biggest challenges and how did you overcome them? Let's bounce it around a little bit this time. Let's go with Nikki first. That's good.
Okay. Well, sort of, I guess, continuing from what I said before, when I had a really great attitude and motivation when I first started testing in 5.0, but I lost my job quite suddenly in 2017. And so I came back from my exam, I think it was CE, and I was feeling super awesome. And then immediately after returning to work, I found out from HR that I was laid off. And I thankfully found a job at a great small firm within a few months. But the thing that was unexpected for me and really affected me was that I lost my momentum, my access to the free study resources and the peer support network of my colleagues I was really relying on. I actually didn't attempt my next exam for almost another year. I think it was 11 months. And at that point, it was just so much harder to focus. I had just sort of felt very deflated about that whole experience. And, now that I've had the opportunity as a licensing advisor to talk to people about their past experiences, like the loss of a job or even being furloughed can be something that, can really derail somebody from this long-term goal. So one of the things that I would recommend to kind of overcome that is to really plan and think about what resources and support for this, your personal long-term goal of getting licensed, that you can access outside of your job. For a lot of you, that might mean like building a secondary network with alumni from your degree program, contacting your university or program library, which is likely to have a lot of study resources that you can access. Join your local AIA chapter and connect with resources and peers through those networks. NOMA also has some really great resources. We all spend a lot of time at work, and work is really important. But since this is a personal goal that will affect your future for many, many years to come, you shouldn't view this goal as dependent on your employer's support for it. You should kind of be prepared to move forward with that regardless of what happens with your employment. The other thing that I did to kind of overcome that psychological barrier was I actually became a licensing advisor. And the reason I did that is because the firm that I had joined sort of after losing that first job sort of didn't have great resources for the young employees who were studying. And so I felt that if I became involved, I would feel more motivated again through helping others. And I've continued doing that for the past 5 years, and I'm really glad I made that decision. So if you are feeling stuck, you can also be proactive and become a licensing advisor or become a person who's really invested in helping others through this process.
Thanks, Nikki. Always love the plug for the licensing advisor community. Always good to hear. Let's go to Alan with regards to what were your biggest challenges? How did you overcome them? And I'm going to add a little bit more to this one. And so Farah can be ready because you did hit a little bit there, Nikki, and what support helped you navigate the licensure path as well.
I believe most of us, or if not all of us, are in the same boat here. All of us would have a full-time job or maybe a part-time job, either one. Social events, maybe exercise, workouts, or we have to spend time with our family. I found it really hard at first to commit to a regular, especially a long-term study schedule. I guess some of us could finish those exams relatively quick, but for most of us, it's a long-term plan. So, like I said, I find it really hard. So I decided to kind of like break it up into shorter sessions after testing it out on my personal study plan for like a month. So I would kind of push myself to get up 1 or 2 hours earlier than before, and would finish my workout in the gym, and then I would arrive at my office at about 7 a.m. so that I could spend a good hour to study or to read before everyone got in, and then I would spend another 30 minutes or 45 minutes during my lunch break to read a little more. And I used to take the bus to work, so I could read on the bus for another 30 minutes. And then my last session would be about an hour before I went to bed. So that's a pretty good, pretty solid 3 hours of studying during the weekdays. So over the weekend, I would try to do 2 big chunks of study sessions. So that's about 20 plus hours each week. I guess my point is, once you have a plan, if it doesn't work out, you need to think about how you need to make changes to make it work, or you just need to be willing to, shuffle your schedules to make certain things happen. So that's one of the biggest challenges I kind of faced when I started. Another thing I wanted to bring out is this is not a particular challenge for me, but I know for some of you, it may be the language barrier, because I grew up in China. Though I kind of like picked up both languages at a younger age. So the language barrier was not really an issue for me per se, but I've got friends from or classmates from China or from other countries whose mother tongue language or languages aren't English. They have been telling me this is an extra tier of hard work on top of the work we have to put in to study for the AREs. I guess my I know this is not going to be a English learning session, but I guess my quick tip to that is just jump out of your comfort zone and try to get used to read and even think in English. I know it's a lot harder. It's easier said than done, but I know it takes time, but you just need to spend the time. And if you need extra time to understand a term, or if you need extra time to understand a sentence or a paragraph, that's totally fine. I mean, take all the time you need. That's part of the learning process. That's natural. Like I said, take all the time you need. Just pay attention to the 5-year rolling clock. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thanks, Alan. Fair.
Yeah, so I think the first biggest challenge for me was receiving a fail on a division. And I think the quicker you change your mindset about that, the better. So I quickly just started to view every exam as another way of studying. So if I received a fail, I would just recall the subject content that was personally difficult or challenging and just study up more on those areas and make notes for myself. Also, you just have to realize that each exam is just a study tool. Any opportunity to take the exam will be incredibly insightful for you. So it's not a waste. It's nothing to get discouraged by. Also, another challenge for me was definitely time away from family and friends. You get FOMO, you miss out on family gatherings or social events, etc. So something that I would do to motivate me to continue studying as I go through as I went through the milestones, was to plan vacations or trips, kind of like these self-rewards that I would have something to look forward to during all of the grueling studying hours. And I think that definitely helped me mentally, just gave me something to look forward to and work towards, like a personal reward. Another challenge was, I'm actually a commuter. I would go in from Staten Island to Manhattan, about 4 hours of commuting a day. And to overcome that, I would absolutely maximize my hours for studying. So during the workday, during my lunch, like Alan mentioned, I would absolutely use that for studying. And I studied on my commute as well. And you can use quick tools like flashcards when you can only study small pockets of information at a time, or you can't retain much, and save your bulk studying for when you have more time on weekends, such as dense reading. And so that was definitely a way to overcome that sort of studying. And then just some support that I received to navigate the licensure path. I definitely leaned on my local AIA chapter, which offered courses. They hosted them, and it really helped my understanding on technical subjects. I'm personally more efficient studying on my own, but then could lean on groups for specific subject areas. It was just personally more efficient for me. There's nothing wrong with that. You have to do what studying style works for you, but absolutely agree that you need to rely on others for questions or subject areas you have issues on. So I think a hybrid of studying alone and studying in a group is a great way to overcome any challenges you might have while studying. I also leaned on online community forums and groups to just learn from other architects' exam experiences and exchange ideas on which study materials were best to focus on. It's definitely easy to rack up a huge list of study materials and books. Like Alan, I also feel like I over-prepared and tried to just gather a bunch of study materials. But for me personally, a challenge was in the beginning, especially confidence. And being over-prepared helped me mentally go into each exam, be more focused, and feel like I was ready to tackle on and take the challenges, no matter what the questions were. And obviously, it definitely helped. I think connecting with others also in a group setting absolutely creates accountability and motivation for you to keep refueling during this process and just to stay on track.
Thank you, Farah. I just want to I loved your little talking about using the commute to study, because I remember when I was in New York, I used to use the subway a lot. And when I would take my ride, it was about an hour and a half into work, I would have my little flashcards, flipping through them while holding on to the strap hangers and all that fun stuff. So you resonated with me there, definitely. So thank you all. I'd love each of you to share the best piece of advice you would have wanted someone to share with you as you were progressing along the path to licensure. So what is your big piece of advice that you wish you had when you started? And I'm gonna start with Nikki this time, and we'll mix it up a little bit.
So I think the best piece of advice I can offer to everyone who's testing, I mean, we've talked a bit about sort of studying, overstudying, and knowing all the content, but certainly don't discount brushing up on your basic multiple choice tests and test taking skills, because the process of taking these exams is not only about knowing the content, but how you're approaching these questions is, really important to your success. And so I'm just going to give an example of a bit of an experiment we did with our licensing advisory group at IBI Group. And I gave the members of the group a multiple choice exam, sort of farmed from like the most difficult practice questions we could find. And they couldn't see the questions, they could only see the multiple choice answers. And so they had to come up with a process of elimination strategy to try to get the most number of right answers on a 10 question test. And it sounds like a really bizarre prompt, but it turned out that most of the people in the group were able to get 6 out of 10 or 7 out of 10 questions right by only looking at the multiple choice answers and not being able to see the question. Now, that isn't a huge sample size, but certainly the way you're approaching these questions and the strategy, test-taking strategy that you have apart from the information has a really big impact on your success on these exams. So apart from just cramming and studying material, especially if you've been struggling, I really recommend starting to look at your test-taking process and test-taking strategy in general, and that may really help you overcome some of those struggles.
Thanks, Nikki. Let's go over to Farah.
So I kind of want to reiterate a point I mentioned earlier, but just hit it home a little bit more. I think during the week and on weekends, there might be an effective way, or at least it definitely worked for me, to split your studying. So whenever I had more pockets of time, I would do all of my reading and notes making and all that. And on weekdays was when I would take the condensed Cliff Notes version of the notes I made that were from the study materials and read through those, because those were just pages that I could leaf through. They were concepts, things that I could absorb quickly. Weekdays are also when I use my flashcards. When you're exhausted from work and you're mentally drained, you want to save or really be efficient about what study material you're studying, during the week when you're exhausted and mentally drained versus on the weekend when you can get up early and dedicate, I don't know, anywhere from 8 to 10 hours, let's say, during a day, which was that's what I was doing on weekends and my core studying times. So just sort of splitting the studying type or the studying materials that you're looking at when you have smaller pockets of time versus larger pockets of time in order to grasp more information efficiently. Another pro tip, something that my friends in private sector took advantage of, is to ask your employer if they would be willing to let you dedicate your workday, the hours that you're getting paid for, to studying. So I have friends that were able to even get 1 hour a day as part of their paid workday to dedicate to the exam. It's definitely something you can ask your employer about and see if they're willing, because just remember, you getting your license is a reward for the firm. It makes the firm look good. It's a two-way relationship. And if they can enable you and give you the time and resources to do that, all you have to do is ask. It doesn't hurt. So it's definitely something that I would recommend.
Thanks, Farah. Ellen, any words of advice?
Yeah, I think my best piece of advice would be, I know some of it would sound cliche, but just don't be afraid to fail. I studied so hard for the CDS and SDP. So they're the one of the two 4.0 exams, Construction Documents and Services and Site Design and Planning. I studied for those two exams so hard. Like I said, I always overstudied. And I failed them like back to back. At that time, I was really discouraged and thought, this is the best I could do. I mean, I may not be the one. I'm never gonna pass these two. So, but after a week of rest or rethinking of my strategy. I think, since everyone could do it, I could do it. So then I picked them up and overstudied even more, and then I passed those two. I guess I wanted to say, you're gonna fail once or twice. So it doesn't matter, as long as you pass those, as long as you pass your last exam, as long as you've become an architect. No one needs to know how many times you fail. All that matters is you made it. So just don't be afraid. Another tip is I kind of realized this during my first 2 years. One of my professors, his name is Mike Newman. I believe he's still teaching at the Black Spectacle online classes. So he used to teach one of our studio classes. So he said, in our very first day of school, he said, "You're never going to be less busy in your life. There was always things getting your way in your life. So the best time to start is now." So yeah, that would be it.
Thanks, Alan. There's a lot of great things I heard across all three experiences and advice. A couple things I do agree. Alan, 100% failure does happen. One of the things I always talk to candidates when they're going on the path is say, hey, make that part of your plan. What am I going to do when I do get a fail? And if you make it part of your plan, then when it happens, it feels a little less scary. And you at least said, okay, I got to fail. This is what I'm doing next. This is how I'm going to continue forward, so that it doesn't bypass. Did you unmute? Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, sorry, since you mentioned it, which reminded me of one of my classmates. His name's Charlie Kletcha. I'm not sure if you know him. He passed all seven exams back in the 4.0 days in 7 consecutive days. Not everyone could do that. I think most of us would need at least a year to finish, and fail some of those exams. So that's, like I said, that's okay. That's natural. That's part of the process. Just like Martin said, make it part of your plan.
Yeah. Thanks, Al. So now it's time to jump into a lot of your questions and things that you're providing in the Q&A box. Please feel free to populate questions in there. If you have any specific questions about any of the experiences, or want to dive a little bit deeper into anything that any of our panelists shared, or just some things that haven't been discussed yet, feel free to throw in the Q&A, and we'll be asking them to our group at this time. So to get us started, how did you plan a study schedule? Did you put yourself on a specific timeline for each exam? And so let's go with Alan first this time.
Yes, the short answer is yes. So I'm a pretty active member in the Facebook study group. So there is either for the 4.0 exams or for the 5.0 exams, there is a recommended order to take each exam. So in general, I always took the hardest first, and I would go backwards. But a lot of people would actually take the easiest to kind of test it out a little bit. But yes, so I started with the hardest of of the past 4.0 exams, which was the construction documents and services. I know structural was possible. I started with that. Failed once or twice. I failed, and finally I passed it, and then I moved on to site plan design and planning. But you can do either the group or the forum to check out. There's, I think, as you search the word order, there will be a couple of posts describing how you should take the order that you should take each exam in. So
thanks, Alan. Let's go to Farah.
Yeah, I mean, I have to echo what Alan said. I followed the forums for advice on which exams to take first. And so I took construction document and services first. And that was a good way to start off, because the contracts are definitely a good foundation for each of the divisions. And then I moved on to site planning and PP&P, because those are related content. But I just want to add kind of like as a baseline, if you're thinking about the order of the exam, I just think content-wise, it's always good to study the contracts and the building code as the basis for every division. And that's just a good starting point, no matter which division you're working on.
Thanks, Farah. So next question is, oh wait, Nikki, sorry, I just forgot. Yeah, forget my orders, Nikki.
I think I'll be repeating a lot of what was already said. As I mentioned, I was sort of an early adopter of 5.0, and I didn't really have, I didn't really, at that time, I think Black Spectacles hadn't even been released for the new exam. So I was really on my own. But one thing, a kind of resource that I think we shouldn't forget about when thinking about different topics is for a lot of topics like acoustics, for instance, I found that doing online sort of like CE courses about those topics was actually really helpful in learning about those topics. I'm a very like audio learner, and so I feel like I can remember things better when I hear a human voice explaining it to me. And so because I didn't have specific third-party resources, I actually looked to a lot of those additional resources. Another thing that just comes to mind is on YouTube, there's this guy, Marty Huey, who has a lot of videos where he talks about building code. Those sort of stand out in my mind as something that was really helpful. So I would say that kind of also look to it helped me to look to resources that were also being used to train licensed professionals about different topics, and definitely don't forget about those in your study process.
I'm gonna evolve this question a little bit. So what was your timeline schedule? Like how much space did you put between your divisions? What was your plan? Is there anything you would have done differently? So I'm gonna add that a little layer to it from one of our from one of the attendee questions. And let's on this one, if you're good to get started.
Yeah, I can respond to that. I don't think I think there's two ways to schedule the exams and prepare for it and figure out your strategy. I know that a lot of people will, to push themselves, will just put up a target date and then just work towards it. For me, I think because I was so intimidated by the process at first, and then it's just something that I adopted, was that I would study for like 3 to 4 months for a division, which might sound insane to some because I know that I've colleagues that studied for a few weeks and then took an exam. But I found that once I felt like I knew the material was when I would schedule the exam. So maybe that was about halfway through, and then I would just work towards it. And that personally worked for me. I don't feel like I had wasted time. I think for me, that few months of studying is what helped me strategize and get through the exams.
Nikki, did you want to go next?
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that. So I, for the first 2 exams that I took, I gave myself about 6 weeks between exams. There was one that I had to reschedule because of a big work deadline, but I didn't really have a set end date that I wanted to complete this by, but I did want to keep taking and possibly retaking failed exams as a steady clip. Or at least that was my intention. I think I did mention that I had about a year gap, right, between 2017 and 2019, where I did nothing at all. But just another factor in that I want to mention is that it's important to make sure you're communicating with your supervisors at your job about what that schedule is and what your intention is. I think most of our supervisors want to support us in this goal, but they can't really do that if we don't communicate with them about when we intend to take an exam, when we may need to take time off in order to study. And it can be really challenging when you have important work deadlines that sort of get layered on top of your plans. And so it's important to think about that ahead of time so you don't get derailed from whatever your plan is.
Thanks, Nikki. Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't really, for each exam, I didn't really use a target date either. I would, like I said, I always overstudied. So I would at least read most of the study materials for the first, at least a month, or like first 4 weeks to get to know better what I'm getting myself into. And then maybe after 4 or 5 weeks, I would know okay, I'm gonna need another 5 weeks to get ready to take the exams, and then I would try to think of a rough time frame, and that would test it out after another 2 to 3 weeks, and then I would schedule it, and then I will work towards that targeted a date. But a lot of times I would also study for example, the last 2 exams for me were PPD and PDD. So I kind of like studied for those 2 exams at the same time. I don't even remember how long I studied for those 2 exams, but it was a long time. And then I scheduled them back to back. I think it was only maybe PPD. Was it like a week apart or something like that? But I failed PD and passed PDD, and then I rescheduled it for PDD. But I think once you don't have to really have a targeted date at the beginning. Just try to get into studying a little bit, and then maybe you could have a feel of what target time frame you will have your mind in term. Yeah, I mean, and then try to study for that targeted date.
Well, I'll add is that it's really like you're hearing there's a lot of similarities in some of these, and there's a lot of many paths that people find. So again, sort of engaging communities and seeing what other people have done in paths. I know there's always a lot of conversation in the ARE community about this time frame and figuring out how much space to put between things, and again, making your plan. It's always good to have a plan, and guess what? It's okay to change that plan, because we learn things as we're going through the process, or something happens that we don't expect, or you lose your job and then you have to figure out, okay, how do I get this back on track and get going? It's all okay, as long as you keep a plan going. So next question. I know, Alan, you responded to this a little bit already, so we'll probably jump over to the other 2, but how soon did you start taking the exam to after graduating college? Do you have any tips of getting back into studying mindset if you haven't been taking a test in a little while? So let's, Nikki Farah, interested in starting off on this one? Nikki, go ahead.
I've been working for about 3.5 years before I started testing. For me, I went straight to an MRF1 program directly out of undergrad. So for me, anyway, the idea of taking standardized tests, because in many ways, like the GRE and the preparation for that was still, and those skills were pretty fresh in my mind. I felt like it was just kind of, to me, felt like a continuation of that experience. But what was interesting to me is that a lot of the test taking skills that I acquired during GRE prep, I had worked with a private tutor who really helped me raise my score, also helped me kind of when I started with the ARE, just in terms of test taking strategy, planning your study time. And so there was a bit of a gap there, but I felt like I felt comfortable with the idea of standardized tests because, I didn't have much of a gap between my education and beginning the ARE.
Actually, I want to touch on the second part of that question about how to get back into the mindset if you haven't studied for a while. I mean, for me, it was about three years after graduation, which coincided with the completion of IDP. But I think something that I've observed that has worked for colleagues is, if you haven't studied for a while or been in academic mode, is to just surround yourself with the coworkers that are studying, because every office there is a study group, and to be able to have those conversations day to day during your workday is just a good reminder to just get going. So just interact with colleagues in person that are on the same journey as you.
Alan, I don't know if you wanted to add anything more, because you touched on this a little bit in some of your earlier.
Yes, I kind of wanted to add a little more. So I think, like I said, I started studying 2 years after I graduated, but to keep that momentum going, that's quite some time. To keep that momentum going, I kind of like just started small. You don't have to force yourself to do like a 2-hour, 3-hour long session. Once you, at the beginning, I guess. You can start with small, maybe, 15-minute read, a 15-minute, podcast session, and those are absolutely fine. Do 2 sessions each day, and then next week maybe do 3 sessions, and then you can move on to longer sessions. So I think that's how, at least I personally, kind of restarted the momentum. Yeah.
Thanks, Alan. And Nikki, there was a question with regards to, you mentioned you're studying and you used audio method of studying, and you mentioned some platform they wanted to, can you share a bit more about that, the platform you used, or how you went about doing more of an audio version of study?
So this wasn't a specific platform. Actually, a lot of the audio studying that I did at that point was actually material that I got off of YouTube. So I made a giant playlist, and I've actually shared that playlist, and it's sort of been built on by some of my colleagues at my firm, because obviously every minute there's people producing new material. A lot of that is more relevant or specifically tailored to ARE 5.0 right now. But I sort of created a playlist on different topics. I mentioned Marty Huey was one particular user who created a number of videos doing sketches and discussing building code and how to do, for instance, egress calculations, which I found really helpful. But some of the other videos that I put in my playlist were, for instance, videos discussing lighting that were actually from a lighting manufacturer. So you can kind of find, I think, good video and audio resources in unusual places. And I think the process of compiling those playlists, which I would often, as Martin, you mentioned, study while I was in my commute. The process of curating that, I think, was also something that helped me study and helped me learn the information. So I'm not recommending any particular user or program. What I'm saying is, if you make the effort to curate information on topics from what's out there more widely, that's an important and valuable learning experience.
Thanks, Nikki. We're getting close to the end. I think we're gonna jump over. I think this is a good question. Are there any specific books that really made a difference in your studying process from your experience? Does anyone who's like to share?
I think a catch-all for me for all of the divisions was the MEEB book. Is it Mechanical and Electrical Equipment for Buildings, and the Graphic Standards. Those two I used as like a reference book for all the divisions. And then from there, I did look at comprehensively the entire list of the books that were available in each of the study division guides, and tried to acquire as many as I could through my local library or the Center of Architecture. But the MEEB and Graphic Standards and the Francis Ching books, the Codes Illustrated and Construction Illustrated, I found really useful as well to just quickly get the information, and it wasn't super dense. I would always use Ballast as like a condensed version of each subject. And so I would start with that, and then I would go to more voluminous content material. I can't think of specific names, but just the books that were listed in the study reference. So I would start with Ballast to get an outline of that particular division, and then I would expand on the additional references listed in the back of each NCARB exam guide.
Thanks. For any other additional? Alan, go ahead.
I think I have a very similar library. The book I like the most is the building codes. What's that called? Building codes illustrated. So that's the book. I mean, it kind of listed all the building code, most of the building code issues in a more graphic way. And I also use the Ballast a lot. I still keep those books in my library. I didn't sell them after I passed all the exams. And another resource I use is the Black Spectacle online videos. My past firm, Cunningham, they used to provide us free subscription services. So I would just going back to what Nikki talked about. I used to be a commuter, but we moved to a more rural place, so there's no bus stop around us. So I had to start to drive to work. So I would just turn on the audio and just play those videos and just listen to it when I'm driving, even though I get really distracted while driving, but I still get like 70% or 80% of the content from there. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Nick, anything to add or?
Nothing specific. I mean, I think I sort of second what Farah said, but one book that I found particularly helpful, and it's become a little expensive on Amazon now, but I promise it's worth it, is the Architect Studio Companion. There's a couple of editions that are floating around, but particularly for the topics that I study, I really struggled the most with and had the least practical experience with, such as buildings, structural system selection, and HVAC system selection. The information in that book and the diagrams are really straightforward. And I actually find when I'm right now in the early phases of planning a project, at my job, I actually often go back to my shelf and look at that book, right? Because it does such a good job of defining what the basic system selection parameters are for different types of projects. So I highly recommend, even if you're not someone who likes to rely on those books, definitely picking up the Architect Studio Companion.
There's one more I just want to throw in there really quickly. The ArchiFlash cards, they are amazing. It was one of my favorite resources to refer to for all the divisions. So ArchiFlash.
And and just one thing I want to sort of build on top of all this. If you're working in firms, a lot of times, a lot of these things are on their shelves in their libraries. And if they're not, talk to your firm, because sometimes they will get these for their library, because even though it's valuable for studying, it also becomes valuable for the firm for just going through details, going through issues or things that may arise when you're working on projects. So getting back to some of the earlier statements from multiple people, advocate for yourself, ask the questions, and inquire about it. And if it's not available, ask. Doesn't hurt to ask. Worst thing they can say is no. And then you figure out the next step. We are really, really close to the end. I know we had a couple questions that we were trying to get to. I think this one is a good one, but I don't know if we need everyone to respond. So interested in your thoughts, because I'd like to be really short and brief on this, is if you need another, sorry, I just lost it for a second. I'm back. There's a lot of questions, and a lot of people are asking about balancing family and life and studying and taking the test. And I know, Alan, you said it right in the beginning, is like time does not get more available. And I'm a very good testament to that. It feels like every time you have less and less time available to do things. Anyone have some quick takeaways of how to sort of navigate that or create the ability to find that time to do this stuff? And if anyone has some quick takeaways, let me know before we sort of go into the wrap up of this session. Alan, go ahead.
Sorry, I'll be real quick. I think you're just gonna make certain sacrifices. You're gonna sacrifice, some hours from something, right? Either from your social life, and maybe you just skip this party, or maybe just sacrifice 1 hour from your sleep, and that's what I'm still doing. So just make some sacrifices. There's no other choice, I guess.
Any other words of advice on this topic? As I'll go, it is something that comes up a lot in outreach. I'll share real quick, and we'll jump to you in a second, Farah. It is about creating that priorities and figuring out what priorities. And a lot of times it's just making the space and finding those little spots, starting small and working it up. And once you start to create the habits, they're a little easier to build upon. And again, finding that way to find those times. But we understand. And again, talk to your firms, ask those questions. I know one of our, Nikki, I think might have been the one who mentioned the fact that sometimes asking, hey, how can you help me? Might have been fair. Which one? But yeah, ask your firm about how can you create space. And a lot of times, sometimes firms might have a lot of deadlines coming up. You go, well, I got these things coming up. I need to have this space so I can get this done, so I can ultimately achieve those goals of licensure. With that, Farah, I'll jump to you for the last comment on this.
Yeah, just about being social. And I think I kind of touched on this before, but on weekends, you're going to be taking breaks for lunch. So why not combine that with social time and maybe make it a 2-hour lunch in between your studying, and like just coming back to your studying after taking a 2-hour, like a walk or just meeting someone for lunch is absolutely amazing. And during the work week, being social with your colleagues and maybe building in conversations about the exam content or professional divisions, that social aspect while you're, essentially simultaneously still getting information that would be helpful for the exam is also great. Like sometimes when you're studying for hours and hours and hours, you don't feel like a human being. You're just so locked into it. But just having that human interaction and talking with someone about the technical specifics of the exam makes a difference and is so refreshing.
And one little quick thing to add is find time to celebrate when you get those little successes, those little moments or things like aha, insights, and share it. And even when you do have failures, share it, talk with others, because sometimes being open and honest with all those things, you find out other people's strategies to deal with those situations when they arise. And so with that, we're sort of coming into the final things here. We do thank you all for joining us. A lot of great questions. I do thank our NCARB team for being in the Q&A and helping respond to things as we do go. As we sort of wrap this up and come to the last minute here, would love each of you to share your one quick key takeaway. And we're sort of going to go from Alan to Nikki to Farah. And then I'll have a few statements as we close out. Thank you. And go ahead, Alan.
Cool. Okay. Thanks again, everyone, for having me. I think the last thing I want to say is I hope my tips and tricks kind of helped everyone to at least get encouraged to get licensed or to get started. I think this, just try to remember this will be for most people a long-term plan or a long-term battle, if you will. Don't be afraid to start. Don't be afraid to fail. Yeah. Thank you.
I think what I would say is to keep in mind that getting licensed is going to have a huge impact on your future and is a personal goal, and your path to getting there is going to be different and unique from everybody else's. So if you want to keep your sanity and reduce your stress throughout this process, I would really focus on what you can do to improve your test taking, what you can do to complete this process, rather than looking to other people who maybe have different skills or in different phases of life and comparing yourself to them, right? If you make this process really about you and not about competing with your colleagues or competing with your friends or comparing yourself to others, I think it will be a much more fulfilling experience. You'll be able to focus more on the learning aspect, and you will, I think, have the least amount of stress, getting to that end game and to that goal. And just another aside, once you're licensed, you still may continue to take other certification tests and continue to need to keep studying and keep learning. So the process of studying for the ARE and completing AXP, right, is maybe just preparing you for other types of learning and certification that you need to do in the future to grow your career, right? So it's in some ways, it's not really the end. It's sort of maybe the beginning in a process of continuing education and learning.
I think it's also helpful to remember that it's a rewarding process, and at the end of the day, it will absolutely be worth it. And that sounds cliche, but just know that there are rewards. So for example, there's job promotions, there are more titles available for you to apply to as an RA, and it lends you more credibility as a professional. For me, it's helped me with my publication and public speaking engagements. The RA has definitely lent me more credibility as a professional for that. And I kind of just want to echo something that Nikki said. I think that this is a continuous journey, and you have to think about what it is you want to do with your license. Do you want to start a firm? Do you want to run a team? Are you looking to dive into academia? And do you want to be able to call yourself an architect? These are all long-term things that will continue beyond your exams and beyond your professional experience. So again, just more diverse opportunities, and this goal will definitely help you with your personal ambitions beyond being an architect as well.
Thank you all for sharing. It was great to hear all of your experiences. And we do also a big thank you to all of our viewers for for joining us today. We hope you gained some insight and picked up tools and resources to use as you progress towards being licensed. If you couldn't see this entire webinar, joined us late, or had some technical difficulties, it will be available on our YouTube channel. You will get a notification about that, as well as posting on our website. If you didn't have time to get your answers and questions, please feel free to contact NCARB on our website or social media. And again, thank you all. It's great to have you here, and I do hope that all of you go on to achieve that goal of becoming an architect. It's always great to have more people in our profession. So with that, thank you so much and have a good day.